Hello, and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for inviting me into your home again this week. We are going to talk Scientology, and as you can see, I am joined by guest Ian Rafalko. Hey, Ian, welcome back to the show. You are a former Scientologist, second generation. We did a show talking about your childhood and upbringing in the family of Dr. Eric Berg, a famous YouTube chiropractor, health nut guy, yeah?
Basically.
So there's the real summary version intro of this. And we did it.
If you want to use his professional name, then that's his.
Yeah. And we got to discuss, some of the joys and not so joyous moments in, being a Scientology kid and growing up in a Scientology household. And you were the youngest of three kids. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were all 2 years apart. So, my brother joined staff very early on. I think he was sent to training at Flag when he was about 11 or 12.
Oh, wow. 11 or 12. Wow.
Yeah. I think that 11, 12, 13, that like little box, like very young teens. And then my sister had a stint on staff. And so we've all sort of, my sister was actually the reason that I went to Atlanta. And then while I was in Atlanta, they got me on staff there.
Right. And we're going to spend our time today where we basically talked about Scientology, the culture, what it means to be a second generation Scientologist and grow up in that environment. That's what we spent the bulk of our time talking about last time. And I thought this time we might move on to the next phase in your sort of Scientology existence, and certainly mine as well, which was going from a childhood and upbringing of this to working for the Church of Scientology.
Right.
And staff, being a staff member, is sort of the first tier, the first level to that, because you are not committing to the billion-year contract and all this,
right,
the full-blown craziness. You are instead going, okay, I'm going to commit to this local Church of Scientology, whether it's in Atlanta or Denver or Santa Barbara or wherever it is. And I'm going to agree to sign this piece of paper that is going to give me I'm going to give 2.5 years, or alternately, there's a 5-year contract.
Right.
And you can sign this. And the idea is that you give yourself as a religious volunteer to the church, and they're going to maybe pay you and maybe not. But you're going to get services, Scientology classes and auditing and counseling and whatnot for free. You're not going to have to pay for that. And that's supposed to be the exchange that's the big deal to being a staff member. And so that's kind of the basic framework of it. Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about you and your experiences with this. How did this come about?
Well, I was living in Florida originally when I was before I was on staff in Atlanta. I was living in Florida, I should say, and it was kind of not going well there. I was getting out of a really bad relationship, and I was kind of going stagnant. I was having a really hard time like finding and doing work. I was set up very poorly or very early on for the life that I was expected to live, I think, in Scientology. So there was a lot of falling down, needing, my parents to come in and swoop in and help me constantly, because I just, I needed a lot of help, I guess.
Are we talking not so much about help, like financial aid, or what? Like, what kind of help are we talking about here? Yeah.
Well, so there was a lot of, now in hindsight, I understand that there was a lot of early onset depression and, very like some early on, trigger warning, suicidal thoughts, so there was a lot of, I think it sort of just developed into like a lull, like a sort of purposeless drift upon like whatever I landed on. And I had some interests, but they never really seemed too close. So
Mm.
growing up in Scientology, and I know this of many people who I know still today who grew up in Scientology like I did, and it's like this quiet, just kind of defeated, you know, like inside you don't have the power to change it, so you're comfortable with your silence, right? So I'm drifting through, and I'm like, man, one of these days I'm gonna have to get my shit together. One of these days it's gonna have to change, or maybe the next auditing action is gonna be what changes it. So my sister was on staff in Atlanta. She joined when it opened. My parents went to the opening, and
when was that?
The ideal org 2015, I think.
Okay.
2016. I think it was 2015, because I believe I started there in 2016. But I needed a place to go, and I was very I was in need of a lot of help. So I was asking my parents, I can't live like this. I'm it's just not working. And they said, well, how about this? You can go live with your sister in Atlanta, and you can do some training. So ProTRs, student hat, the metering course, and you can get some stability. And while you're there, you can find a job, and you can work on, writing, because I wanted to be a writer. And,
because you had been, as we covered in the first show, you'd basically been raised in a home that was very Scientological by parents who were pretty indifferent, kind of not really there, not very present for you. And when they were often angry with you or upset with you because you wouldn't seem to be acting right or doing Scientology right.
I'll do just like a very light context for those who are more unfamiliar. Is my parents are it doesn't appear that whatever they learned in Scientology has actually, let me just rephrase that. My parents are very cold, narcissistic people who, from my observation, are almost driven exclusively by Scientology and everything that you use in Scientology, because there is so many like tools, so to speak, that you can sort of pull from and that you can try to use. I mean, they say like, workable tools. I mean, that's subjective, I suppose, because it works as well as you believe it worked in the time. You make up whatever reason. In your head it worked, and sometimes it does work, and you're like, like these tiny things, like manage, like planning your day, or battle plans, can be useful sometimes, or setting targets for myself and study. These things were useful in the moment, but I was basically forced as a child to conform entirely with no space. Like, I was supposed to become a obedient Scientology, essentially staff member in the house, or like a sort of quasi I don't even have a description for it. Really,
well, let me offer this based on what I remember from our first talk here. And I really encourage people to go, watch the entire or listen to the entire podcast that we did. But I see it as, there are some Scientologists, far too many, who are very much into Scientology for what it's going to give them. And what it's going to do for them, the transformation to the godlike state, or the power, the being at cause, as they put it, right? And it seems that there are far too many people who not only, I mean, everybody gets into Scientology for that, but there are some Scientologists, and I think your parents are an exemplary example of this, who are so into themselves that if the people around them, even their kids, don't take to it immediately like a fish to water, they just don't really have the time or patience to deal with their problems or issues with it. It's like, you didn't get it? Well, you're just an idiot, and I just can't really be bothered to pay a lot of attention to you or deal with you or your bullshit. And that's kind of how they seem to treat you. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, you reminded me, like, it in Scientology, you are not really a son or a father or a mother or a sister or a brother. You know, you're a thetan. You are a spiritual being. So, who's lived lives before you just forgotten. So my mother took all of this very, very, very literally and like acted. My father took a little bit more time. You know, my mother actually played a big role in pushing my father deeper into Scientology by surrounding him with, you know, more successful Scientologists. And I found reports that she's written that, you know, detail that. And so through my whole childhood, it was kind of like, remember already, you know, remember that you've been an adult, stop being a child, you know, stop being emotional. When my mother actually found out that I was having suicidal thoughts, she said, well, just wait until you get to the OT levels. You'll realize that your emotions aren't really what you think they are. So don't worry about all that. Don't worry about those feelings. And I'm like, that was the least helpful thing you could have possibly said. So they're basically, and no, my mother has never given a piece of original advice in her life, because after having been trained, I realized every single point of criticism or advice or, you know, whatever sort of manipulation that she sort of attempted on me came almost directly from the words of L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of nuance to that, but I've looked into sort of, you know, looking back, looked into my own past and sort of finding it really hard these days to see, you know, what I did wrong at all as a child, besides be a kid, you know, and that was very taboo. It was, you know, you weren't really allowed to, I wasn't allowed to do a lot, you know, I was very isolated and I didn't understand many things about the world, although I was very curious. And I had what I know now, and, you know, hindsight, I had a matter of some undiagnosed autism to a degree enough that made it, you know, very difficult for my parents to accept my behavior. And just what I was interested in talking about and the things that I said and the questions that I asked were just very non-optimal for them. So they made my life, they made it like, they reduced me to a level that was comfortable enough for them to control fully. And that required a certain level of pressure, a certain level of manipulation and duress that they would have to keep me under, including financial duress, like financial, like pushing me to do things that would put me in financial stress, so that I then needed to depend upon them, because she knew, my mother, you know, had this mindset of he'll come back. He'll realize that it's all what it seems to be. And he'll realize his overts or his harmful acts against one's own moral code of conduct in Scientology would then catch up to me and accumulate in a mental mass that would cause me to then commit crimes, because people aren't allowed empathy in Scientology. Empathy is but a concept because it was written by someone without it. You know, someone who sees empathy as alien and who sees sympathy as a distraction. Because it's not about him giving sympathy to others. He gets no pleasure in that. So why should it be important? I remember in KSW, and all the times I've read and word cleared in every single method, KSW.
Yeah, but this is the central policy of Scientology. It's called Keeping Scientology Working, KSW, and it is a focal point of Scientology and foundational to their beliefs.
We would recite it verbatim in the and we would Chinese school it in which is like repeat the somebody yells out a line from a quote, and then the group repeats it just right back, and then they go to the next part of the quote and the next part, and it's like a big thing. We did this in the flag internship.
Yep.
With this reference, because it is it describes how serious Scientologists should be taking Scientology in their day-to-day lives and their actions. And it says, we are not kidding. We are not joking. You are either in or you are an enemy.
Yep.
Or you're in the fucking way. And you don't get to ask or challenge the tech ever. And my favorite is, what did he say? About 20 and 100,000 suggestions, which is like, what kind of fucking numbers are that? Like 100,000 people suggested a way to improve Scientology because it has many flaws. And he accepted 20, like, we should fix the water fountains in the bathroom, or like, we should, build a smoking hut so that, the boss is happy. Like, it's just this like, sort of bizarre claim that because something was made by one man, it can only be benefited by remaining. Like, he's like, because I was smart enough to come up with this, I think I'm the only person smart enough to have an opinion on it or authority on it, is essentially what this reference is about. And that it is a deadly serious thing. What they are doing in Scientology is what it says. So she took that to heart. My mother took that very close to heart. And she, she made sure I remembered what I believed, what she wanted me to believe, what the truth was, so that led to a lot of stuff. Either way.
Yeah.
So my childhood was very aggressive. Right. And so I ended up very subdued, very, I didn't know really what I had. I didn't really know what was going on. I had no drive. I had no aspirations. I was frequently, I had insomnia quite a bit. I had very bizarre habits. I developed a drinking problem. I had a very addictive personality growing up. So it's, coming out of the other side, wanting to be better. I sort of blamed myself for all of these things, absorbed all the responsibility. And then you look towards, well, how can I make it up? Right. A lot of young Scientologists will join staff just for this reason, or perhaps, so they don't end up like this, or so they don't end up, because in Scientology, the production is the basis of morale.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So,
if I might interject for just a moment,
sure.
I wanted to comment on the fact that we've talked in other podcasts on this channel about this concept of adults in little bodies, that Scientologists consider children to be fully realized and grown adults who are just happen to be growing a new body. And that this concept is most talked about in non-Scientology circles or in the world related to the sexual crimes and pedophilia and nonsense that goes on with children, and how adults in Scientology can justify this or rationalize it because, they're just adults in little bodies, and so I can, do sexual
and you can
things
audit out any. And when you say that, and my mind immediately says, well, how would they justify that? And I just thought, well, in Scientology, you can use Dianetics to audit out any physical trauma as well. So There is no lasting trauma in Scientology. So that's actually, and I've known people, my ex-wife was an auditor. She audited a pedophile, and it made her very uncomfortable. And I said, well, who is this guy? She's like, he's a staff member. And we're trying to keep him on the straight and narrow. And we're trying to, make sure that he doesn't, he's saying that he's visiting playgrounds too often, and he doesn't know how to control himself. And, all these things obviously pointing to the fact that Scientology is not stopping him from being a pedophile, which this is then a legal issue. She's not going to report him to the police or to any authorities because he's on staff. He's trying,
Exactly. And they can run these mental gymnastics and circle, and run themselves around in circles justifying this behavior. But what I wanted to point out here is, while we talk about the more salacious, consequences of that in regards to sexual assault of children and things like that,
Absolutely.
there's a bigger picture here. There's a much longer term problem connected with this entire philosophy or idea that children are just adults in little bodies. One, they're not. They're children. They're immature. They are growing. They are learning. They are little sponges of information. Their brains are still developing. I mean, there's so much knowledge and information about children and stages of development and so many things to know that Scientology ignores, discredits, invalidates, says, just no, none of that's true at all. Fuck all that. Fuck all that child psychology. Fuck all those counselors and people. We know the truth. You're a Thetan. You just got a little body and you just need to take responsibility and grow up and stop acting like a kid. And when you pound a kid, like as you've described here, right? I wanted to highlight this, that for years and years and years, your entire childhood is this idea manifested on you. Of course you're going to have massive problems with emotional development, with learning development, with responsibility. You're going to have responsibility and trauma issues.
I was taken out of school constantly. So this is also, gross educational neglect that I made up for in my own way, because I did not hate learning things. I was just sort of restricted from learning the things that I wanted to learn because I remembered it. And if I remembered any bit of psychology, I would, that was a problem. It was a problem for me to look for other evidence-based systems that I could add to my arsenal of information, because I was just so poorly educated as a child. Right. And I guess I absorbed information differently. So, that just adds to it, but you're absolutely correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, again, being more of this backstory to this, what we're talking about here, we come back to Atlanta.
We come back to it.
So what happened?
Well, so I moved to Atlanta, and my mom says, "Don't join staff," which I'm like, interesting. She's like, "Well, you're there to be on study," and the implication there now is obviously that staff members, as much as it is advertised that you will get to do your courses and all your training and auditing for free, you rarely will ever.
Correct.
Because there is either never someone who is available to do so, or there is no one trained, period, or the person who is trained to do it is only auditing public, because the public pay the money, and that's more important than you if you're on staff.
Correct.
So
and that all assumes that you have the time to do it.
Oh, and that you are upstat, and that you're having anyway. So I go to Atlanta. Yeah. I meet this guy, Spencer Marrier, who was the HES, the HCO executive secretary. Mm-hmm. And that's basically the person who in Scientology who is above the first three divisions of the org.
Right. Recruitment, the org establishment, like human resources, income, like sales, dissemination. Finance. Yeah, that stuff.
Yeah. So because these are all failures of any of these are ethics matters. And so the HES is more of an iron whip, whereas, they have a normal leather whip for the other ethics officers. But it doesn't help. So he took an interest in me, and he was telling me things like, I make $3,000 a month. I do all this, I get to do this, I get to do that. He was selling me this like very cushy, oh yeah, you get to do this job, and you get to do this, and maybe you get trained, and that's free training, and for someone who knows how expensive auditing is, the training, and who knows how expensive the training is, it's very, that's like value. That's like a steal, right?
That's right.
And I'm there.
It's a real sales job too. It's tempting for Scientologists, because auditing is thousands and thousands of dollars racked up over time because it's what is it? A few $100s an hour is what it comes out to. So
yeah, I mean it's
a bargain
for orgs, for class 5 orgs, which is your everyday org. It'll be $2,500 per intensive, which is 12 and a half hours of auditing. And then you obviously buy as many intensive. You don't buy one intensive.
Right.
You maybe buy an extra intensive after you've run out of a package and you need to finish that last little bit, but like you're not done. But usually you're going to buy it in chunks so that they'll offer discounts, like all other businesses do.
Exactly. I mean, just to give an estimation for folks out there, it can take anywhere from
I can give you
15,
numbers. Like my
go ahead.
Oh yeah. Well, so I remember so SRD is obviously I did that at Flag, so that was about $5,000 to be there. I
just
did
for that one
with
step.
Just for the one step, yes.
Wow.
Especially at Flag, everything is double price because they just have more people there. Essentially, that's what I equated it to. Is just that they had more people moving faster than they would in an org where there is no people, where everybody's currently busy constantly and they can't help you. Flag, there's usually somebody there. I mean, now it's almost when I left, there was never really anybody to help me with the things that I needed, but there were just people there. Once I was done with the training aspect, it was like I wasn't getting auditing. It's like, well, there's nobody around to help me to do anything because I'm not paying money. So who gives a fuck? Right.
Let's say this. How many intensives of auditing do you think it takes on average to go from 0 to clear?
0 to clear. Well, they shorten the grades tremendously. And now ARC straight wire, it's pro TRs or student hat pro TRs, upper indoctrination TRs, the metering course, which is now 2 weeks because you do the course 3 times in a row. Usually takes you 2 weeks if you're full time 14 hours a day like I was. You will do it in 2 weeks. But that's not what most people will do. People will last months.
I've seen people out for years on that course.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you're an OOT, you're an outer org trainee who's from an org training at Flag, you're pushed. You don't have the luxury of patience. You don't have the luxury of like waiting or like doing it on your own time. You are supposed to be done before Thursday at 2 this week, no matter what course it is. So, and if you have extra time after you finish that course, like I remember one time I finished a course right after I finished my metering course. It was the morning of Thursday morning, and I got in at 8:00, and somebody comes downstairs and they say, "Hey, have you done the allergy and asthma rundown auditor course?"
Right.
And I said, "No, I haven't." And they said, "Easy 6-hour course. I'm enrolling you on it so you can get another comp this week." And obviously, it did not take that much because it is an ancient course that does not use any of the technology that I was trained to use because all my stuff is, anyway. So all this stat pushing, forcing these completions, it doesn't really matter what the training is, but the price it was like $2,500 per course. And then I did about 30
different courses.
35, yeah, and I did an internship as well.
Right.
But
let me redirect you back to
the auditing.
Yeah,
auditing.
Let me get you over to the auditing side because we're talking about training. But I just wanted the audience
they shortened it.
Yeah, what are they looking
it'd be somewhere. They advertise it lower than it is, obviously, but it's advertised, I think, to be somewhere like 6 to 8 to finish the grades and NED.
Really, that few?
Yeah, and it usually ends up being more like 25 or 40. Mine was like roughly, I think, 58 or 60 total. I mean, I did a lot of NED intensives. These are $2,500. I think just recently on Superpower, my Superpower trip, just recently, I say 2 years ago. When I was last at Flag, I was on Superpower. I didn't even finish Superpower, and my parents who were sending me there spent somewhere over $200,000 just on the services. We actually paid for 2 Superpowers just on because I was getting security checked because I didn't want to be a staff member for the rest of my life. Right. I said, I think my real purpose is making movies. And they were like, "Oh, okay, that's I'm going to write that down and circle it in red.
Mm-hmm.
And
inside joke there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was forced to stay there for 5 months, being passed around different terminals, passing me back and forth, sec checking me every other day that I had to pay for. It was a ethics ordered action for no other reason than I had other purposes in life than Scientology.
Yeah, you had other fish to fry.
Yeah. Oh, I was in doubt now. I was this doubtful suppressive who obviously had done nothing. And, even though it said Scientology doesn't work on suppressives, an awful lot of people get to the OT levels and end up leaving. So I'm not sure who is so, and even in your own, they lack so much critical thinking that they don't think things through that much. But I was forced to stay there and do all these things, but it was all coming out of my parents' pocket, and they paid because I was there and I was in the middle of it. And what are they going to do? Say no? What am I going to do? Pay for it?
Right? Because you were a staff member at this point.
Yes, and so and I was trying to transfer. I was just so done with the situation.
Right.
This was much later.
Anyway, yeah, we kind of went to the end.
Coming back
to the beginning.
Coming back, I mean, even when I was on staff, I was paying for Scientology services as a public because that's what they wanted me to do. Because my parents had money at this time. My parents didn't start making money until I was like 20 or so, or 19 to 22, I think. I'm 26 years old now, so it was back then, and they started, my dad's YouTube started, making money, and he was buying, new cars and, all sorts of stuff. Not like fancy car. He bought himself a new car and then didn't like how it drove. So he bought himself the same new car over again. And then, they've had a lot of expensive purchases for themselves.
Cool. So it wasn't that they were struggling to pay your bills. They were flush. They were making some good money at this point.
Yes, absolutely. And it was like, this $200 a week for food is too much. You need to and I was on staff too. So I'm going to circle back.
Yeah.
So I was promised certain amounts of money to be on staff by this guy, Spencer. I was promised that it's a really chill place to work. It's going to be booming soon. It is booming now, as you can see from all the money I just told you that I make. And that's what he's saying to me. And, he's also pointing to, and there's this that girl you were staring at in the lobby. If you join staff, you guys might, I could put in a good word for you, and you guys might be able to, get together. And this happens. This specific action actually happens a lot. It was actually while I was on staff, I dated a girl. Not her. The girl in the lobby. That wasn't really a thing that happened. But later on, I did end up dating another staff member. Who was used by the org to flirt with other prospective staff members while we were still in a relationship. And they said, what was the word? What the term was like, he's a female, he's like a woman tag or something. He's got like it's like a special name that they have for it, where you send attractive people to like coax them onto staff, and and they flirt with you, and many Sea Org has sent many girls to try to recruit me to the Sea Org, and it's never like they're never overtly flirting with you, but it's like they take a very heavy interest if they know that that's a button of yours, and they'll text you unpromptedly and ask you how your day is, and it gives you really weird vibes. It pulls you in, sort of.
Yes.
But that was very unethical to me at the time, and I gave the person, I was rebuked for writing a report on it, because she's recruiting, and I'm being critical of her dissemination tactics.
Right. And this would go both ways, by the way. You would have male recruiters who would sort of do this flirty recruiting thing with female prospects, and you'd have female staff who could do, or Sea Org, who could do this with male prospects. I watched it happen and did it myself. Yeah. I
did
watched
it too.
that. Yeah. I mean, got it. Yeah. I mean, that's how I sold people stuff as a salesperson, and that's how I recruited some people. It wasn't just that, but it certainly was a tool in the toolkit.
Yeah. And I never knew. So I get on staff, and eventually my parents are like, okay, that's fine. And in hindsight, it sort of feels like they were saying, oh no, don't join staff. Whatever you do, don't join staff. We're not going to help you, because they did end up continuing to help me. And
right.
I got to do. I was picked out to be something called the SSO, which is the Staff Section Officer, who is the person in Division 5 in the qualifications division, who is in charge of all the staff training and processing.
Yep.
And I basically I had carte blanche over, I could say, you are going on course right now. Or I could say, you haven't been in session, I'm sending you to ethics. Or you have been avoiding you haven't been ready for session for like a week. You haven't been sessionable. So I'm chitting you, or I'm KRing, I'm writing a report on you or something. And I could also change the courses that the people had to take, although I had no control over this at the time, because the org was being run through the Sea Org, through the LRH Com, or the L. Ron Hubbard Communicator, who is almost always these days a Sea Org member, or maybe they don't have enough people. But at the time, I knew ours was a Sea Org member, and she reported directly to CMO, the Commodores Messenger.
Okay, in Atlanta.
So she was, So she was in charge of the org, and the ED, Debbie Bank, who is her husband was like a famous dentist or something. He's a very successful dentist. So she was loaded after he passed away. And so she was doing most of her and her son, who also was a dentist, Josh Bank. He's the head of the OT committee, I think, down there or something. He's in there. But either way.
They were very, in other words, I mean, we're throwing around so much Scientology terminology.
Yeah, I'll just cut. So she was in charge. She was very wealthy. A lot of wealthy people in the executive positions, and a lot of poor people in the lower positions. That's a better way to break it down.
There we go.
I'm a detailed person. I have, I add a lot of context first where it doesn't need to be before I say the thing that I actually want to say. But I don't, I rarely get embarrassed by these things these days, because, who gives a fuck? If I were in Scientology, I'd be punching myself off camera, but I'm a weird guy.
I don't say that to in any way disparage you. I just know the audience is, you're just going to have to keep up a little bit, folks, because we really are trying to do our best to give a lot of context here. But this is Scientology. It is neck deep in terminology and vocabulary, and we really are doing our best to keep it clarified as we're going.
Yes. So, so I basically had a job that I was limited in power at the time by those who were in charge of me. And there were a lot of wealthy people who were telling me that the reason that I was not able to make money is because I don't know enough about Scientology, right? I don't have the tech. I don't have the data. So I'm working with this, as the Scientology would say, a stable datum, which is just something you keep in your mind and you hold on to, like a thought that keeps you grounded or something.
Perfect.
So that I didn't know enough, that I was lacking the information I needed to complete this, to be a better staff member.
And let's be clear now. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but let's be clear. You were raised in Scientology. You were familiar with the terminology and basic concepts of Scientology. You'd been around it your entire life. You'd read a bunch of the books at this point. You'd listened to a bunch of the lectures at this point. You were a staff member in an org.
Yeah.
But your problem is you don't know enough Scientology to be able to do your job well.
Yeah. And I was an SSO for 7 months, and I read a lot of references, and I did a lot of drilling, but I hadn't done, there were certain things I hadn't done. I hadn't really trained too much. I did the student hat in Atlanta, which I did pretty fast. And then one day there was a lot happening, and I'm not going to go off into everything that happened during that time, because there was a lot. There's always a lot. There's so much. It's ridiculous. But at the end, the ED, Debbie, came into my office, and she sat down and she said, "How would you like to be a class 5 CCRD auditor," which stands for the Clear Certainty Rundown.
Right. In other words, you could take somebody all the way up to the level of clear and get that done with somebody.
I decide when they're clear, basically. Like, I know I can take them all the way up, and then, but to do that, I have to myself be clear. Now, at this point, 7 months into being on staff, I had, they made exceptions for me to take time off of staff to go in session because I was paying for it, which is something they would never do if I wasn't paying for it.
Yep.
Like with actual money instead of debits, which mean nothing. It's essentially just a record being like, I owe you, I owe you, I owe you. Yep. It means absolutely nothing to debit anything, especially with like Flag stuff. Like, they make millions of dollars a week at Flag. There's nobody's worried about paying people back. All this money goes straight to the top anyway. But so I was offered this, and I was a Neurodynetics drug rundown completion. Like, so that's the last thing you do. That's like the last thing before clear.
Yeah, you were steps away from achieving this state of clear. You were right on the doorstep of it at this point for yourself.
Yes. And I was still having so many problems, but I said, this sounds like an adventure. I'll send me to Flag. I'll do it. And they did, and I trained for 11 months, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. I got 3 or 4 days off total.
Wow.
One was Christmas. One, I think, was Thanksgiving. Another one was my birthday. But not Christmas. The first Christmas. Sorry. I started in fall, continued then till the following November. So
wow.
I went through that. Anyway, and
this was in Clearwater. You got sent physically over there.
This was in Clearwater. Yeah, this was at Flag. I was there. And we got off, we took the buses to the motels and back and forth. You were staying in motels with other Sea Org members, and we were treated like Sea Org members, and and that's a whole another story in of itself. And there's a lot that happened there. Security, was very strict at the motels. They constantly, they took people's phones, looked through their messages. They had dogs that they would, they had a guard dog that they would have walk around the property with the security guard, David. And he would, it would keep people from leaving. There are like laser trip sensors and cameras everywhere, night vision. The whole line of the property is all lasered up, so nobody can leave, and it's on the water. So
that is very new information to me. I have never heard about those security precautions and trip grids and things put in place to monitor people there. That's wow. That's even more 1984 than I had remembered.
They had to. People. Like, I asked what the dog was for, and he said, in case people run away. And I was like, at the time, it was like a joke. I was like, yeah, I can see that, so the dog can find them, and you can help bring them back and, help them get off their overts and get them back into the fold. But I think he meant it in a little bit more of an aggressive way. That guy, he had some issues. I think he was too excited to have that attack dog on on his arm. We were not allowed to pet the dog. That was very disappointing. Anyway, I trained this place, blood, sweat, and tears, and doing the thing. Did over 30 courses, an internship, which involves rigorous. I did, I think, 165 hours of auditing on my class 4 internship, and that was in a month.
Wow. So this is nose to the grindstone stuff. I mean, it's hard to imagine how intensive this is unless you live it. But it's just nose to the grindstone from the moment you open your eyes to the moment your head hits the pillow at night, and you're getting what, 5-6 hours of sleep a night,
if that. Like, I think lights out is at like 11:30, but you don't get back to the motels until like 11. Or 11:45, I think, and you get back at like 10:30, and you have to change. Then there's exercise at night, where you have to run for at least 15 minutes, and you're not allowed to do anything else but run for 15 minutes. So everybody's running because you're sitting all day. So they like legally have to put you on your feet, I feel like, for that period of time, so that you don't develop like herniated discs and your legs muscles don't atrophy. You have to walk, and we made the most of it, but. We, being me and the few people, we were, I wouldn't say a clique, but like a small group of closer friends,
Yeah. Yeah. You tend to get tight with the people you're on training with. I did 4 different full-time training projects or programs when I was a staff member, and I was travel from Santa Barbara down to Los Angeles. I didn't go out to Flag for training. And you really do bond with the people you're training with, who come from all over the world to train. Right. So there, there are some gains here in experience and learning and growing and meeting people. But man, that is so overtaken or overshadowed by the rigor and the just the intensive drive to produce statistics and work. And at the same time, you were being hit up for money all the time, or to hit up your parents for money all the time while you're there trying to get through your training.
My intern supervisor, my supervisor, I actually had a couple supervisors because there were a few that had to speak different languages. For the OOTs, there was an OOT course room. So there was like a Taiwanese supervisor, there was a Russian supervisor, a Spanish supervisor, and a Italian word clearer in the back named Giuseppe. And
just to get this out of the way real fast for anybody who's a little lost, word clearing is not the course supervisors are like the teachers, and the word clearers are like their assistants. They're the guys who sit down with you and work over the words and the understanding, the concepts you're trying to understand, and get you to clear them up. That's what that's about.
Yeah, there are 9 methods of word clearing.
Right.
And each 9 is a different sort of technique. And word clearers are essentially specifically trained on these 9 and using an e-meter and ProTRs and things, so that they are sort of like tools to make things go faster. If people don't, in the lore, it's like if you go buy any MUs, it's bad. Don't do it.
Exactly.
Or you are fucked in every sense of the word. And that's the reason that we're actually all here, by the way, is somebody had a misunderstanding trillions of years ago, and a being misunderstood something, and then violence happened and chaos. And
that's right.
And then we needed bodies, and then bodies became all we were. And then, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I'm a sucker for a good sci-fi. I'll eat it up. And it's probably one of the reasons that, they were able to hook me, that I was creating the images myself. I was creating my own past lives in the session, and it was like, oh, wow, that's so cool that I was there. But like, I could do that out of session too. So there was no difference from my observations. It was just I was being asked to make something up on the spot, and it was like I was already able to do that. Either way, I did a lot of when I was at Flag, I got a repair program, because apparently all the auditing I had done at Atlanta was like botched from, which is another thing, which is like, it does, just because you do a service doesn't mean that you've done the service. It means that somebody has delivered a version of their interpretation of a service to you, and they gave you a certificate. There is no broader verification above, like below the flag level. Like, you can't, like, most of the auditing that, most of the auditing that you do will have to be redone.
Exactly.
No matter what you're doing, like, you're going to find a problem. It's impossible to be a good auditor just based on the like logical contradiction, like not logical contradiction, like the logic that he's using, that L. Ron Hubbard is building for you, that you're supposed to work under. It is so flawed and so self-destructive in its own like distrust of itself. It's like a very like, this is the most exact technology. We have no idea what can happen, but this is like a scientific accuracy. Like, they throws around like exactness and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I'm trained to I finally go clear while I'm at flag.
Let me halt you. Let me pause you for a second, because I want to harp on that point you just made, because it's an important one that gets that doesn't get enough attention and is a key to why Scientology in Clearwater is able to make as much money as they make. So I want to explain this for people, because it's part of it's actually a built-in part of the scam that every single Scientologist unquestioningly accepts. And it is this: it is that there is a hierarchy of correct application of Scientology.
Yep.
And that at the lowest levels of Scientology, in other words, in the hierarchy of the organizations, you have city level churches like Denver, Milano, etc. These are called class 5 organizations. Then you have these next higher level organizations, which are manned up by Sea Org members, and those are service organizations. The St. Hills and the advanced organizations, and those are what is in Los Angeles or at the UK or in Copenhagen, Sydney, Australia. They have these bases where these service organizations exist from the Sea Org. Those are class 6 and AOs and St. Hills.
Advanced org.
That's right. And those have a certain level. And then there's flag. And there's only one flag. And it's in Clearwater. And it's the only class 12 organization in the world. And it holds one of the positions of flag, according to L. Ron Hubbard, is it's the ultimate holder of the standard of application of Scientology. Flag is perfect. Flag never makes mistakes. Flag never screws up. Flag is where you go to get the best of the best, which is why they charge literally twice as much for services there as they would at your local city church. And the part of the scam is you'll go and you'll get a bunch of auditing or a bunch of training in, let's say, Denver. And you go up to Clear and you do, you spend a couple $100,000 at Denver, and you do training and you do these classes and you do the auditing. Then you ship your folders and all of your information off to Clearwater, because you're going to do your next higher services there. Well, the first thing they do is they review from bottom to top all of your folders of all the work you've done so far, and all the worksheets of all the auditing sessions you've had. They go through all of it. They charge you to do this, by the way.
Yeah.
And they list out they use reams of paper to list out every single mistake and error and screw up that happened in that auditing, regardless of what you think about the auditing.
Yep.
And then they tell you when you arrive at flag, this was screwed up, this was screwed up, this was screwed up. You're going to have to do these things again. And by the way, yes, you're going to have to pay for that. And people do it.
Constantly.
And this is a built-in part of the scam you can't get around it. There's no questioning this. There's no querying it. There's no saying, I'm not going to do that. there is none of that. You merely have to accept that this is how Scientology is delivered, and you got to pony up the money when they tell you to. So we've never really harped on that as much as I want to. So I wanted to focus on that for a second.
Yeah, you say that, and just so many things come to mind, like the fact that my mother, who is even still so fiercely devoted to Scientology, was false clear attested twice.
Yeah,
which means this woman was told she was clear, got up on stage at Flag, got a certificate, gave a big speech, and then later they said, "Hey, actually, you did not go clear." And she said, "Well, shit, let me spend a bunch of money to fix that." And she did it again. And then GAT2 came out right after that, which was a whole redesign of everything, basically making it look like this standardized package of, this is the final edition of all of our collaborated data. We've gotten all the, there were some bad secretaries, which is an excuse David Miscavige is still using even today, as if there are so many bad secretaries. Maybe we're just real bad at picking secretaries. Once, fool me once, fool me twice. It's like they don't get that far because, they're OT. But I digress. That happens so often. So I got these repairs that, and the auditing the process was better in comparison. When you talk about the beingness of an auditor, which is essentially the presence that an auditor is trained to exude, which is a very stoic, powerful, direct, presence. You have a job, you're not interested in anything except for the answers to your questions. And if you can, I did my best to be a nice guy, and I just happened to have, I did my best, and I was actually a favorite of the internship soup for doing sec checks on Sea Org members and other OOTs because I was fast and I got their secrets out, I just knew when they were bullshitting me. So I just could cut through it. And I was nice about it for the most part. And I was persistent and patient. And it was just something to focus on, the training really, it's very militant if you're doing it in that environment that I was doing it in. It's very, you feel structured because there's a big new shiny metal rod up your ass. You're gonna feel it. You're gonna feel it. It's gonna be a little, gonna be a little cold going in, but once it's up there, boy, do you sit up straight.
Yep.
So after 11 months and all this stuff, I finally got offloaded, which I was told to leave for an ethics cycle that resulted in me meeting a woman and getting married. And then divorced, but that's also another story. I explained some of that in previous interviews and on my channel. But I left Flag.
Oh, we should be clear about something. Just to comment on this real fast. There's no dating. There's no sex. There's no relationship stuff. No. You don't have time off when you're at Flag. You don't get Saturday and Sunday nights off or any bullshit like that. You are nose to the grindstone. And if they catch you flirting around or screwing around with trainees from other organizations, you both are going to be in an awful lot of hot water.
Doesn't matter if you do anything. Honestly, most times people don't do anything. But if they're talking too much, and if they see you talk too much, in their heads, it's these two are going to abandon one of the other orgs, and they're going to lose that person.
Yep.
Because these people we can't trust these people ever because something happened probably a couple times in the past, which I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen.
You're talking to somebody it happened to.
Exactly.
I hooked up
something
with another
similar
trainee.
happened to me.
Yeah.
Something similar happened to me. I was a little more resilient on my position, and I was like, I didn't really let them a lot happened, and I was very naive at the time.
Right.
I was just, they didn't piss me off enough yet. So I I did everything they wanted me to do, but I did make a friend who I was accused of being romantic with, and then it became this whole like forbidden fruit thing, and her friends were talking to me about what she's thinking, and it was just like a whole big weird mess. And so after she left, we ended up dating, and then she came back, and that wasn't allowed, and it was like a whole thing. But
Right.
so I got some like 3 or 4 ethics programs for that, but it was about 12 pages of references each, including clay demos of every single reference. But that was normal. These hands have
yeah, we mess with an awful
molded
lot
some
of clay. Yeah.
you wouldn't think like of learning of something like Scientology that's like the first thing that like on the outside I can see it looks weird that like there's just these people who are like they're playing with clay all the time, but it is not play. I promise you, it is definitely, we do not want to be doing this. This is work.
No.
This is part of the learning process.
That's right.
Or it is sometimes ordered for you to do so that you make it real for yourself in your head. That's the idea, is that you're molding with clay to make a physical representation of an idea or a thought or a system or of an entire auditing session, which includes setting up the session, finding the PC, doing this, then getting them in session, then, putting the heater on their feet and putting the lotion in their hands. And is the room all right? Thank you. I could do that whole thing. I could do all the updated, I remember it all.
Oh yeah.
But, I tell you, it's, there are many steps. And what was I saying? That was the original point.
Well, we were talking about you were talking about doing these ethics programs because of the whole 2D.
Right, the clay demos. Yeah. So clays were rough, but it's part of the gig. So I did all these things, and then I eventually was told to go home. I had done my NED course, and I was on my class 5 internship, which is essentially I'm a fully interned and validated Scientology auditor, which means I can deliver the hundreds and hundreds of auditing processes, and including all of the objective specialist course, which is that big book. I've read that entire book cover to cover.
Oh man.
It has I think over 500 or 600 processes in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely, so you have to, and you get the special version, which, tells you why it works, when it's just, it literally doesn't matter. You just try them until one does something good. And that's how it's working. And then most people do the main battery, which is just general. Anyway, all this noise aside, I was trained to do basically everything, and I was good at it. And I prided myself in being good at it because for once in my life, people respected me. People in my life respected me. My family was suddenly like, wow, look all these things you're doing. Look, you know how to clear someone. That's crazy. Now, I never did the CCRD auditor course because I left too early, but I wasn't really allowed to. Because I was needed then in Atlanta to audit people. So I switched posts upon returning. I was told that there was a line of pre-clears waiting to be audited, and that I couldn't do any personal services. I'd flagged before I came back. None at all, even though I had them paid for. And they said, no. My the FR, the flag rep, Sarah Teresi, who was in Atlanta, she said, no, he can't do any personal services. We need him back to audit people now. We need him in the chair, is essentially what you hear. And so I went back, and there were 2 repair programs, which for an auditor is a very small amount of work. And I finished those in the first 3 days. And I had no pre-clears for another 2 weeks.
That was the overwhelming wall of pre-clears they had for you, were 2 repair programs?
It was because they could afford to fly me back that night, like that day, just to get it done.
Wow.
And that I knew enough, and they didn't really need a NED validated auditor. They didn't really need somebody to side check all my class 5 work, basically. But it didn't matter because once I got back, I was put to work on all the public, and I did an awful lot of auditing on very few people.
Mm-hmm.
But I did my part. It was like, at the time you're thinking like, I don't want to be out of session, because when you get back from flag, what you realize and this is, I'm sure any flag trained person listening to this would agree. When you get back, you are very overwhelmed with a feeling of disappointment in the shift in production change. Some people, I think, might not mind it so much. There were a lot of people there with physical problems who didn't really like the very physical, active part of training. The stairs and walking to pre-clears to eat and moving, even just getting up in the morning. Sometimes people needed like medical exemptions or something, special schedules, and because they just couldn't take the normal process.
Mm-hmm.
They still got yelled at just as much. But when you get back, you realize that all this stuff you've been preparing for was just kind of like wishful thinking, and that now that you're back in your org, it's empty, and you're not. And the less time you spend doing the thing that you trained to do, that's never usually what you end up doing. Like, you get back to your org and now you're on letter writing because the org can't find anyone to pay for auditing, because they're doing fundraising events every weekend and no one can afford anything, and nobody even wants to afford to donate. And they keep us there until 11 p.m. and keep the public there until 11:30 at night in these events, squeezing the lemon until, the ED's rich son says, I'll do 10,000 or I'll do 5,000. And they're like, yeah. And they play Eye of the Tiger for the 10 billionth time.
Isn't it amazing? Because this is a change that Miscavige has overseen. I mean, back in the 1980s, it was unthinkable that you were going to draw the majority of money out of Scientologists and just send it to some nameless, faceless bank account somewhere offshore and call that an IAS donation. It was all about paying for auditing and paying for books and paying for services. And that is a gigantic sort of sea change that happened in Scientology under Miscavige, is that the money went from going to the local organizations, which would send a percentage up to Miscavige, to, no, you're not getting the money, I am, and just going in there and taking all the money out of the field.
They can't be trusted with the money, of course. David Miscavige is the only person who can be trusted with any amount of money. All the accounts need to be in his name because he knows what's best.
There you go.
Obviously, he's doing such a bang up fucking job.
Obviously,
avoiding the law and whatnot.
Yes. It's just a big change for Scientology, and it's one of the major reasons why less auditing happens, less services happen, and why less people are now part of Scientology is because they're just not even doing Scientology. It's quite wild and completely backwards from what L. Ron Hubbard said to do and how he grew it. So it's just that's one. It's not a big brainer here as to why this thing is tanking. Miscavige has been tanking it for decades. Yeah.
And consequently, what ends up happening when you aren't doing the job that you were asked to do or that you were trained to do, that you've been, you've had this expectation that it's going to be this intense and you're going to have all these people. And for me, the auditing was actually fairly easy coming back because you are in such high pressure situations, and there's a camera in every single auditing room at Flag. So I could physically watch every session that I did and also look at the e-meter at the same time. I had like a main hub where I could just pick, this room at this time, this session started, and then I can check all my stuff. So, but like when I go back to the org, I have none of these things, which is fine. But I also have no PCs. The org has no students. The org has no money. And I, now a trained person, am expected to do all these other people's jobs and call in, which is a very depressing activity.
Yes.
By the way.
Yes, it is.
And despite my social anxiety, which I've struggled with for a very long time, and it gets, I have some pretty, I can break down sometimes, and I can, and that's just a consequence, I guess, of my upbringing, but consequence and effect of my upbringing. But calling these people who would get mad at me or bothering them, or they just slam the phone on me and keep my morale up is kind of impossible. So I'm not going to talk to any of these people. I'm literally on the brink of going anywhere else. If I don't feel better, but y'all are promising me these things that I'm not getting. And so calling these people is sort of a labored task for me, because I'm talking to people who are like, what's the event for? Is it a fundraising? I just went to the IIS event. I really don't have the time to do and these people walk in and just look so depressed, and they skip right past the sign and table, go right to the food, because that's the only reason people show up these days. But I watched the expectation turn into reality, and it didn't really matter how much I was auditing. I was actually at a certain point punished because I was too good of an auditor, because I was too fast. I finished. I knew where to go so quickly. I knew how to handle it. And I was so sharp at the time that I would knock out these programs and they would still have hours left, or they would still have, a couple minutes left. And I would be instructed to work on their folder, doing this, the thing you mentioned before, the looking through and the correction. It's called folder error summary, or FESing.
Yep.
And it's pink sheets, all these pink sheets, and I would be set to do that, so that we could take idle hours from folders and turn them into a completed intensive of auditing, which would then be added to the statistics of the org. That would make us look better, but we're not actually auditing people. We're just doing a lot of folder work.
Right.
And our org actually got into a lot of trouble for that. I remember coming back from Flag, there was a Sea Org mission led by a guy named Chris Burpee.
Oh, I knew him.
Oh yeah. And he had a little team. There's another one named Gensi, and there was this bigger guy too. This he was like a hard sell guy or something like that. But they were all Sea Org members from CMO, and they essentially did a lot of stuff that wasn't allowed. Essentially, they did a lot of what are called in Scientology financial irregularities. And they're called ESTO missions, establishment missions. So when an org is failing, the idea is, well, let's put together a group of people in the Sea Org, train them on their mission, on what they're supposed to do. What's lacking in this org, right? The idea is helpful, but the execution is very rarely good, because you can send them there for wholly altruistic reasons. But once they get there and these things that they're trying aren't working, what becomes a problem is the amount of money that the orgs are making. So in Atlanta, we never made enough to pay the power bill. In the time that I came back from Flag, and that I from my training, and to the time that I left Atlanta, we constantly struggling to afford anything, because there were no campaigns, there were no dissemination tools. There wasn't even someone called a DissemSec, a dissemination secretary, head of Division 2, who was in charge of promo. The promo room was just empty. I used that big paper cutter sometimes. That was pretty cool. But other than that, there was the Mac in there that you could use to edit the photos. I was set to the event photographer, because I had photography experience, and so that's just what I got put on. I honestly was grateful to just have that, because I didn't have to hound people or sit them down and extract money from them in some painful manipulative way, because that's just not who I am. I've never been one to like, if I should be able to succeed with the truth, you know, and if I have to lie, then it's detracting from my success personally. So I mean, that was just how I acted. It was awful for them because they just wanted to use me as a trained tool, because I had done all my upper indoc TRs, which is the upper indoctrination TR course has to do with physically like being A to B. That thing that you were talking about, the book before, it's about being tone 40, or basically putting as little time between your decision to request something or have something happen and that thing actually happening. So you shortening of those two things. So whether it's physically moving a human body, you're trained to do that. You're trained to cut through people struggling to get away from you and flag. I've thrown a couple people against walls because they tried to escape from me while I'm doing the drill. And I'm a big guy. I'm 6'4", 210 pounds. So I was hard to run away from, but and I'm light on my feet. So it's, having done all that, there's a lot of, expectation on me coming back when everybody's just like depressed that nothing's working and they're not getting any help on their life because they're too busy working on staff, or they're on staff they're not going in session. They're not doing the courses they want to do. They're not succeeding in life, mostly because Scientology does not work. But they don't know that. They're not conceptualizing this presently. So what I noticed was just making the biggest deals of the smallest wins, and like cracking the whip on the smallest failures, and sometimes the best weeks we had were when we got to, when we met a fundraising target for the IAS, and a percentage of that target went directly into staff pay and was diversified beyond between all the staff members.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about how much were you making a week? Because you get paid weekly as a staff member, right?
Yeah. So when I was training, we diverted a little bit, but I'll come back. When I was training, I was making about $100 a week, and I'll explain. And that gets into that wasn't supposed to happen, but when I actually got back to the org and I found out about this mission, basically what they had been doing is they had been creating bank accounts, opening lines of credit for people, taking out second mortgages on people's homes, and maxing out other people's credit cards, taking hours paid in one folder and putting them into another folder with different names. So you're basically stealing hours from people who you just assume aren't coming back. It's basically, it was a huge form of theft, essentially. Right. And credit card fraud. And
what year was this?
This was 2017 through 2019, I think.
Yeah, so we're talking right in the middle of the whole chase wave time period, where they were just charging credit cards, doing all kinds of stuff, as we described in earlier podcasts. Yeah. Yeah.
So those financial targets were just most important. So I was when I got back, I think the most I made was like $80 total for 1 week. I mean, before that it was like maybe like $20 a week, $35 a week, $16 a week, $14 a week, $8 a week. One week I got like $6.30 or something.
Wow.
And but you don't do it for it's not about the money.
Yeah, it's not about the money. Yeah,
it's not doing it for the money. So you're fine. So you take that stupid envelope and you sign your stupid little name, and you rip the thing in half so that the treasury secretary can put it in her little basket and go on her little DOS computer where she can put in the finance system, like ancient code that I don't understand. No, it's it was quite bizarre. But anyway, so
much for $3,000 a month, though.
No, never anywhere remotely near. I mean, the executives made a lot more. The people in the executive divisions did, they did make more. They got what are units. So you're paid in like a certain amount of units that are divided. And the more training you do, you actually can get units added on. And it's like this very overly complex system that doesn't need to exist. But the more you have to think and the more confused you are, the less you ask questions.
Bingo.
In Scientology. That's used all over the place.
Yeah.
But there was this, I found out that this mission with Chris Burpee and also helped by the FR, Sarah Teresi, they had done all these things and they had created such a massive problem that the field was actually complaining. The field being the people in the Atlanta area who were active in with the org with Atlanta.
Basically the local Scientologists.
Yeah, exactly. So they were starting to complain because one of the, for many reasons, there were a lot of problems. And so what happened, it's actually pretty crazy. There was but int management, essentially.
Okay.
Sent these people, these different kind of auditors, financial auditors, to look through. They sent a whole mission to look through every single folder and in the entire folder tank and every financial transaction over the past since it opened, finding all of these dollar amounts and trying to cover it up by trying to reach out and paying these people back what they were estimated.
Okay, got it. So this was the same thing that happened in Cincinnati and some other places that we heard about, where once the word got out that this chase wave was being busted and that the financial institutions involved were catching on to the fraud, the church sent its own internal finance people around to clean up the books and clear everything out and pay people back and clean things up so that the Church of Scientology would not be financially liable for gross and blatant fraud. And that's what it sounds like you're describing, because that's a similar thing that happened, I've been told, in other Scientology orgs around 2019.
Yeah, it's a lot of that happened. And also afterwards we got new training manuals that talked about all the things you aren't allowed to accept now. You're not allowed to talk to any banking person. You are absolutely not allowed to use anyone's credit card information without previously, so that like a hamster in a cage would understand. You're not allowed to, that's how simple, they really drilled it in. You do absolutely nothing with their credit card.
How interesting. They actually put that in writing in a manual.
Oh yeah. You have to get a Method 9.
I would love to get a copy of that thing because this is the first time hearing that this was actually put down in written form. We knew that a bunch of people got fired. We knew that a bunch of people got transferred off their jobs, and that there was a really big deal with the consequences of this with the personnel of Scientology. But I did not know, this is the first time hearing that they actually put this thing down in writing of thou shalt not A, B, C, D again, so that we don't run into this problem.
Yeah, it was a blue flag order. So it had, and then it had, I think, a little pack attached to the back. And, but yeah, I remember, and it was bizarre because I remember explaining it to my, my ex-in-laws. I'm divorced now. I actually recently was finally able to get divorced, which is pretty cool. So that's all over and done with. Good. But, at the time I was talking to my sister-in-law, and I was explaining this, and I was like, but it's okay because they got paid back, so the people who were at fault, they went and got handled, and the church came and paid them back. And even then, my ex-sister-in-law, who was the HES of her org, so also she stopped me right in my tracks. She cut me off and told me to stop talking. And I was like, what's the problem? She's like, oh, it's in theta.
There it is.
Why would you spread that information? Why would you talk about bad things that happen anywhere?
Right.
Period. And I'm like, you are the most negative person I've ever met, and you're telling me to, she's a very hostile and aggressive attitude, but somehow me just describing a negative circumstance that could have been caused by the church was suddenly this nightmare to talk about. And that was, one of the few things that really, had me lose interest in following all these nitpicky rules, because nobody really followed anything. Nobody really followed, the structure that I had been presented with. My memory is such that I just happen to hold on to a lot. And I sort of see it all at the same time. So when I'm looking at Scientology, I'm looking at all of these, references that I've read, or if I'm looking at all the ways I trained myself to be as a Scientologist, or my auditor training, it's all just kind of floating around. And I can see it all for what it is. And I can see the good, and I see a lot of the bad, but like being on staff was unexpectedly one of the most demoralizing experiences of my entire life. Like even at Flag, I had agency to run around this big building, and I had energy to fight back and do what I thought was right. Things moved a little faster, but when you're on staff at an org, you kind of lose this ability to live your own life. And right. I couldn't afford to rent a place. So I was, again, supported by my mom, who just paid for, we were in this house, this staff berthing, and there were 2 little apartments close by the Atlanta org that were, licensed under the Church of Scientology, but they didn't pay any attention to it. They just let the staff members figure it out, like pay the rent and the electricity. The guy I was staying there with, the guy who was in charge of the bills, he one time he said one time the power went out, and I was like, why'd the power go out? And he said, well, I guess we didn't pay the electric bill. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, I never got one, so I didn't know we had to pay it. And I was like, well, what money have I been giving you? And it's just like, oh, all the money, but I just didn't know how much to ask you for the electric bill. So I just didn't. So I was paying rent minus electric, and the power went out for a week. And
oh my God, I was like, for a week?
And a week. And then when the power, so we stayed in the opposite. So I was like staying in the opposite one, like on the floor, during the day. And at night I would go back because it was cold. So I was fine with the cold. I could sleep in the cold. But then the power came back on. Eventually, I think somebody figured it out. I wasn't sure. I remember they asked me to call my mom, and I had to call my mom and ask her to bail out this apartment of adults. One of whom was a woman with her child age son, who she couldn't take care of during the day because she had to work at the org. A lot of stuff to unpack and a lot of craziness, but
wow.
We talked last about that guy Kesavan, that my roommate who got scabies from that woman he invited from out of town anyway, there was this guy, one of my roommates. The power goes out for a week. When the power turns back on, I say, hey, Kesavan, you have a log of beef in the fridge that I see you've segmented into burgers for the week, and it's in the freezer. Since the power went out, it's gone bad. How do you when are you going to take it out? There's an inch of frozen blood on the bottom of the freezer. How do you plan to take it out? And he said, oh, it looks pretty good. I mean, it looks like it's still good, so I'll probably keep it. I've already eaten some of it. And
oh God,
that was the day that I left to find another place to live.
Yeah. Wow.
And I told my mother that. I mean, I think that fact alone sickened her enough that she was like, okay, that is pretty gross. Because that guy was constantly sick, and it seemed to just be that he doesn't understand how medicine works. I don't know what.
Hey, he's just making it go right, man. What do you give him such a hard time for? So he's just making it go right.
One disease at a time.
That's right. Right. Hey, I got to comment on something we talked about a minute ago on this N theta thing, because this is really important too. Right. And you gave a perfect example. I mean, picture perfect example of how it's used and what I'm going to highlight here. I don't know of a better thought stopping cliche or thought terminating concept that'll just shut down thinking faster than the word N theta in Scientology.
Absolutely.
It is universal. It is universally applicable. You can use it in any circumstance or situation to shut down an entire train of thought. Whatever the person's saying, they're stopped in their tracks, and it's such a slam dunk barrier that once it's put there in the conversation, nothing else can happen. You just have to move on. If something is labeled N theta, whether it's Leah's documentary, whether it's you talking about financial irregularities in the organization, whether it's complaining about not getting paid, whether it's anything at all. If a Scientologist tells another Scientologist, that's N theta, that's it. It's a conversation stopper. And, and there are very few things. I just wanted to comment on the fact that there are very few things that are as powerful as that. Even outside in the real world, I don't see. Right. It's almost like it has the same kind of power that Nazi used to have or something before it got watered down. It's this incredibly powerful concept that whatever it is you're talking about, whatever, it's bad, it's wrong, you shouldn't even be thinking about it, much less talking about it. And this is just pure brilliance when it comes to the concept of mind control or thought reform, because this is how it is done. And this is also anything on the internet having to do with Scientology. Oh, it's anything.
And not even negative stuff sometimes. Sometimes Googling Scientology is itself the overt act. Having had to extract many overts from individuals myself, many of which far too explicit to say on YouTube or on a podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, the things I have heard would, shock a lot of people, I think. But anyway, you learn this technique where essentially L. Ron Hubbard describes overts a lot, and he essentially equates overt acts to every source of evil, right? They're sort of the manifestation of the wrong act or the confusion that preceded it. And this confusion will create disorder and chaos. And in order for there to be the concept of order, there must have been the concept of chaos. All this stuff that he took from somewhere else, because it's not in context. You don't use any of this information. A lot of the information he uses to describe something is mostly filler. You don't deviate to I remember that one thing I read in this book. Let me try that. You don't do that in auditing. As an auditor, you do a set number of actions on a set number of prepared lists. These prepared lists can sometimes be just prepared before session, questions. But one thing you learn is that if somebody has negative thoughts or a desire or a criticism or an internal negative outlook about a certain specific thing, your job as the auditor is to find when was there tell me about that thought. Okay, thank you. When was there an earlier similar time that you had a critical thought like that? All right, thank you. Tell me about that. After that, you say, could you tell me the first time you had a similar critical thought to that? And just before, and then you get them to tell, and you say, okay, well, thank you. Just before that, what was the overt that you committed?
That's right.
And so you get this idea that all N theta, if you're hearing it, it's coming from a distrustful source. You're already sort of getting that SP sort of wall up, and you're like, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I thought that integrity was enough. you'd think that someone's own belief in a system would be strong enough, if it in fact worked for them, that they would be able to hold it. That's sort of how religion works, period. Your belief in something and your belief in it manifests your behavior towards it because of what it does for you.
That's right.
You don't need this reciprocation, but in Scientology, it's all about like results and what L. Ron Hubbard said you're gonna get at the end and what he's promised you. And there are promises and there are financial exchanges for promised gains constantly. Constantly behind the scenes. They would never say in public, oh, Dianetics can cure cancer, because obviously that's illegal. That would be dumb to say in public, just from a self-serving religion point of view. Someone who wants to keep control, all they have to do is lie and wait and not respond. And then you create this like, well, what is the truth? We just won't know. But like, you or I know. So we saw it. Mike Rinder knows. Leah Remini knows.
Oh, sure, of course.
It's every person out there who's watching this who doesn't have the courage to speak out, or who perhaps wishes they could speak out or could do more, knows this. And I know that what I've noticed is that no matter how many times I remark on how naive I was as a Scientologist, the amount of joy I feel from actually being like intellectually free to be my own person and to learn things like unbiasedly. And you realize there is such a thing as being unbiased, or there is such a thing as being biased, and bias is important. Sometimes, it takes the context. There is no truth. Like if you're a Scientologist, there is no real truth. There is no certainty on anything, because it's all based on your like what happens to you when you apply the tech or whatever. It's like if it's it's why that interview recently with the PR head of Scientology, she was on a podcast or something. I forget what her name is, but she is the head of PR, and she also recently read an LRH quote in front of the Clearwater City Council randomly.
Yeah,
and
Pat Hardy, you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's in Clearwater.
So,
yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
She opened her mouth and she said, "What is personal integrity?" And I said, "Get the fuck out of here. Are you a prayer? Go fuck yourself." That is, you know how many times I had to like spell that reference out to someone and be like, "Why don't you know Scientology?" Anyway, she did this thing and she started her interview by saying, what's true for you. What is true is what is true for you. And what she omitted to say was, until you actually do any Scientology, because then there is a higher power than you. Like what is true for you is only subjective to get you into Scientology. Like, yeah, you're going to bite whatever you're going to bite. They're going to let you nibble whatever you need to nibble to get in, because once you sign that contract, you're fucked. You've literally, we're getting close to getting rid of these contracts, I think. And these contracts that you're made to sign in Scientology, all we need is like delegitimization or some kind of, prior amnesty or something could happen. And that would just literally allow these people the legal freedom to say whatever they want. And Scientology can only harass so many people at one time.
Right.
And, I feel very strongly that people want to talk about their experience, but they don't know how to describe the fear that they feel. And I think describing that fear itself is the first step, whether it's public or personal. I have come a very long way, and I drug myself through the mud. I have felt all the negative feelings that I need to feel. And I am now sort of, I just get it now. And I just kind of understand that sure, I had this very negative past, but it helps me solve a problem that is very active today. And, I feel like all the people that I watched suffer in life on post while I was on staff, the people who couldn't feed their families, or the people who had to, people who were above me who were ordering me around because their lives were miserable because of someone who was ordering them around. And I saw the direct line, and you couldn't question it. It's impossible. How dare you evaluate on somebody else's situation, on their own level of personality. You don't know them. Like, you're not allowed to know people. You're not allowed to know who is like you and who is not. Everyone is their own. It's not like we're one species of organism, which would, make more sense. We're all these celestial individuals coming from this place and that to be isolated from each other. And it's like it's a nonsense. I've looked at this quite a bit to try to understand, how much of it is what I blamed myself for and how much of it was just abuse. Most of it was abuse.
Yeah.
About 98% of it was pure abuse. And many people think that it's them and that they did something wrong or they're going to be in trouble. I can tell you, you're going to be just fine.
Exactly.
If you talk about Scientology. And I know that because I'm here and I feel actually more than liberated from those feelings. Although it would be a light thing to say I have a chip on my shoulder, but at the same time, they have the literal biggest chip. They invented chips on shoulders.
Right.
They make enemies out of anyone they can. And on staff, it's no different. But you see these bad things happening, and if you can remember them, if you can, count how many times on a finger that you've seen somebody get corrected and then come back and do the exact same shit, or the same time, or how workable is that? If you constantly have to correct yourself, it's like that's real life anyway. Being aware of not doing the wrong things and making moral choices, but you don't need what inevitably becomes aliens and prior civilizations and past life, recall to fix. It's just not that complicated. Well,
no, it's not. But it's made complicated, and it's made to appear complicated. And I think what you're describing is the difficulties of and the sort of the steps of recovery from this activity, from this group. I mean, it's there's so much. It's hard to appreciate, if you didn't do it, the levels and the strength, the power of the fear and the guilt and the responsibility that's laid on you constantly in Scientology. And this framework that you describe, this like all these creatures from other galaxies. What are we and who are we and where have we been and what have we done? And you have this incredibly complicated framework that you're trying to get your wits around the entire time you're in Scientology, because Hubbard is only giving you bits and pieces here and there. There's nowhere that it's all just kind of laid out for you. Here's the picture. Here's
endless contradictions.
Oh, constant contradictions, right? Because you're listening to a lecture from 1952, and then the next lecture you're listening to is from 1968, and and things have changed, and you're supposed to just kind of figure this out and roll with it. And if you don't, you're the idiot, and you're the one with misunderstood words, and you're the one with false data, and you're the one who doesn't understand, because Hubbard's perfectly clear when he's, clear as fog. I mean, it just doesn't, it's not clear at all. And, and I think part of the struggle, that you're going through or been through, and I, me and everybody else comes out of that, is the struggle of trying to think with, well, there must be parts of this that were true, that made sense, that were real, that meant something. And the recovery for me, and I think maybe for you, has been the letting go of all those, quote unquote, important things that really never had any truth connected to them at all.
Yeah.
And realizing that you were really living on a bed of lies, that were never actually supposed to make sense.
Yeah,
They
and
were supposed to confuse you. You know?
The deconstruction was a lot of me realizing that, like, I was convinced a lot that Scientology was making life simpler or making concepts more digestible in some way. And then when you only have to be asked so many times to explain what Scientology is before you get annoyed, because the expectation of effort you're about to expend describing something, which is why you'll only hear celebrities say, "Oh, you got to read a book, look into it. Oh, you got to just do your own research, just read a book," because they are so confused themselves. If they are one of the people that they're aware of that just wildly has MUs and might just misinterpret the tech completely, that they'll set a bad or negative or non-optimum expectation of Scientology, and then be in trouble by management, and then they'll get attacked. So they're not going to say anything. They're just going to say, "You read a book. Oh, well, it's actually, you have to find it for yourself." It's like, yeah, obviously, if you were like, "I want you to hold my answers. I want you to hold yourself accountable for what I say." And then, so you go pay. So then you hold yourself accountable for the money you just spent to do the course, on the expectation that perhaps they'll be interested. But most people are not interested in that kind of logic, because it doesn't really work. But deconstructing for myself was a lot of opinions and thought processes that I used to evaluate decisions and how I viewed myself, through the lens of a Scientologist, and expecting those lenses to exist externally and outside of Scientology, which they can, but mostly it's very, very not the same.
Exactly.
People are people. That has never changed. People are not all out to get you. There are people, anyway. Yeah. It's like, it's just realizing, like, your thought processes, like, decide very early on that it's okay to be wrong, and that it's okay to let go of these concepts, because they are, I mean, I guess for me, I could say they were more than concepts. They had influenced other entire ways of thought for me, sort of using my brain, hitching a ride to make computations that were unnecessary, or, cause problems where they didn't need to be, or have anxieties about galactic invaders, things that distract me from thinking about, why am I on staff this often, and why am I staying late and working both orgs? Because we just only have 15 people on staff, or 20 people on staff, or we have a complement of 27 staff members, but only 10 show up, and nobody wants to be there because nobody's getting paid. So everybody's working other jobs. And then we get a dispatch from David Miscavige saying, we shouldn't be moonlighting. And if you are moonlighting, well, that means the org isn't making enough. That's a failure. So y'all are going to get sec checked, or, an interrogatory, or, investigations done. There is so much. There is just factually so much raw information that describing it, I would forgive any ex-Scientologist from being too exhausted to describe it, because you really shouldn't, and you really can't ask, well, what is it? Like, why is it bad? Like, you gotta give that some time. You gotta be ready to sit down, grab some popcorn, and then yourself, look into what they've actually done, because Scientologists paint like very specific. They're trained to, or I should say, they're drilled on scripts on how to respond to people who ask them about Scientology. It's very, very rarely genuine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, look, we're going to start wrapping up, because we've been at it for a while again, and we've been talking about lots and lots of things, but we did cover an awful lot of what I wanted to, in terms of your staff experience in Atlanta and your training at Flag and what happened there. and your thoughts and feelings about that. And of course, your thoughts and feelings about getting out of that and recovering from it and reorienting and readjusting, thinking accordingly. It's hard. It's complicated. It's difficult. And anybody who pretends that this is supposed to be easy is either in denial or avoiding it, I think, if I may be so bold.
It's kind of hard to not be in denial,
and
after,
it is hard.
However long in Scientology.
That's right. That's right. Because Lord knows I certainly went through my phases of that. I mean, I thought when I first got out, give me a year, I'll be all good, and it was like, no, dude, that's not how this works at all. So, we all have our journeys and our roads that we're going down here and figuring this stuff out. So I hope that by, through our ruminations and thoughts and ideas about all of this, that you guys get some deeper level look at what we're actually struggling with and what this is really all about when we talk about recovery from a destructive cult. There's the bad things that happened, and then there's the trauma that's left over that we got to deal with and sort out, and that takes time and it takes work. And I know that's true for every single person who's come out of any kind of destructive cult or, coercive kind of situation. So, hope that this podcast helped, understand Scientology a little bit more in all of its vagaries and nonsense, and helped understand Ian's journey, and what you've been through. So, thank you very much for taking the time to talk about this.
Absolutely. I enjoy these talks. It's very refreshing to talk to people that I have so much in common with, and I know I have my own process of getting the information out. It's not always the most streamlined. It's not always the most pedestrian, I guess. But
sure,
that's my brain work. That's how it works. It's how it's been working. It's always done that. I'll get there. You want a question or you want an answer to a question, you got to ask it a couple of times, but I'll give you the answer.
Absolutely. And you've been doing great. And you've been doing great. And
so anytime
absolutely.
We'd love to talk more.
Definitely we will. Because we've got more stuff to talk about. I do have more questions for you about your experiences and your thoughts about all of this. And of course, Scientology now, as we're recording this right now, the Masterson trial is hot and heavy. It's just getting going, really. This is probably going to post in a couple weeks, so other things will have happened between now and then as far as the trial goes. So I don't want to comment too much on it, except to say that there has really not been as much attention on Scientology as there is right now because of that trial, and I'm very, very happy about that. Because the more exposure we get to the actual nonsense of Scientology, and we touched on, by the way, in this talk today, some of what these women had to experience as well, in being victimized by Danny Masterson and by Scientology. So I hope that this gives some, again, shed some more light on the topic. Again, Ian, thank you very much for taking the time. And
thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And we'll do this again. Folks out there, I want to let you know, because I need to plug this kind of as a thing, is not only can you support the channel or the show through Patreon, PayPal, Venmo, whatever. Links are always in the description section of my videos. But also I am now doing consultation. I am available for that. And that is not the same thing as therapy or counseling. I am not a therapist or a counselor, but I do consultation. So if you need any assistance, have questions, have concern, relationships or something in a tough coercive situation, don't know what to do, have questions, contact me and we'll figure it out. All right. So I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.